Okay, so the first thing I want to do now is actually change our viewport like we did before. And I'm just gonna show this whole blank layer here. Hit D on the keyboard and go backdrop, bottom right, left. Click OK, and switch that to our left view. And this way we can see this major part of the second object that we're going to be working on, which is going to be this piece right here, which has some arteries coming off the end. And it also curves around. And we have these extra bits of muscle coming out here. And it all is underneath these arteries we created before. So we'll have to keep that in mind while we're modeling. But we can start this out pretty much the same way if we started the other one, by going to Create, Box, and we're going to lay out that box. About right there. And actually, we're going to be extruding the second section, so we don't need to include that as part of this main model. So pretty much when you're modeling, you want to kind of break things down to realize what needs to be extruded and what needs to be part of that base box that we're using. So we'll just take that out, and I'm going to hit the right arrow key with the cursor in our left view so that we add an extra slice in here and hit the spacebar. Now Shift D to metaform and click OK. And now we have this extra bit of geometry, these two extra sets of polygons, because it is a little bit longer and it's not as circular or as spherical as the main section. So now we can start doing what we did before, grabbing our points and moving them into position to create our shape that we're looking for. Just using the move tool, lassoing the points. And we also want to use the magnet tool, so Shift and colon. And I'm going to give us a little area of influence over here. Just drag that down, pull that over, and pull that down. Spacebar, and now hit Tab, and we can take a look at how it's going to look when it's metaformed. And Control Z to undo that right now. And we're just taking a look at it with the other object. And if we take a look at our top view, we can see that we also need to move this over just a little, so we can actually just show that second layer. T on the keyboard to move, and Y to kind of rotate that so it's a little curved. And I'm going to bring these points out, and also bring these out as well, because we will need some polygons to extrude these pieces from. And we notice that this part is not raised up as much as it should be. So what we want to do is use that magnet tool again and just kind of pull that up, making sure that everything looks okay in our other viewports. And always keep your other viewports in mind when you're working, and don't ignore any one of them because then your model will look a little messed up. And now we can come in here and just kind of sort out some of these polygons, just as we did before, how we're rounding it out. And I'm taking a look at these specific two right now because we're going to be using these to extrude out these pieces right here. So I'm just moving those into position for that effect, and that extra little piece that comes out. But we also want to make sure that we're not messing up any of our other polygons that we have in here. So we got to tweak those as well. But I want to do this now before we metaform this, because they're major pieces, and this way we'll have some better blending once we metaform it. I want you to keep in mind too that since we have this left viewport in here now, it does throw off the other ones because typically this should be reversed the other direction, but it is a little bit easier to see. And if you want, you could just switch that to the right viewport, and then it might seem a little easier. So now you're looking at it from the back, and this way when you pull this inward, we're all working pretty much the same as we were before, where we don't have to worry about kind of that flipping, and it does make more sense with actual orthographic projection, but you can easily switch that back and forth if you wanted to, just as long as that image is correct. Although right now, technically with this viewport, you really can't see it anyway, so that doesn't really matter. And we probably won't be using that viewport too much for this piece right here. So now we can start to actually extrude these. Shift T just to drag these inward and just do a little more editing. And I want to take a look and see where those polygons meet up. And actually, if you notice that most of the polygons are actually inside of this model, well, we want to be dragging these downward. So I'm going to hit Control T, and I'm going to edit our main model, or that first layer we did. Just drag that downward just a little. And if you don't know how to activate both of those viewports at the same time, you just hold down Shift, and you can select the other viewport, and that way they're both in the foreground. And I also want to edit our other piece over here, and also kind of bring that inward. So you just want to keep that up while you're doing it so that we don't have any intersections, and so it looks nice and smooth. Might even need to bring that out just a little bit more. Just bring it over our right. So lots of little tweaking involved, but we'll end up with a really neat looking effect once we're done. And what we can also do is kind of bring that inward on our first layer, just to kind of move this stuff out of the way. Bring this down just a little, so we've got a flatter area to work with. Because if you notice in our viewport, it actually comes down a little bit further than the rest of the model. So we can go ahead and just bring that down, just tweaking it, so that we don't have to worry about this stuff getting in the way as we're working on the other part. Plus we'll have some nice blending in there too, and we don't need to worry about the intersection so much, because there'll be a nice overlay once it's laid on top. And now we can kind of bring that out into position so it matches up with our top view again. And it was mostly that first layer that needed editing and not so much the second. But it's good to tweak them both. Alright, so now we're going to grab our first polygon here. Pull that down, and now we want to start to kind of extrude that out. So Shift F, right mouse click, T to move, and now Control T, we just want to drag these points inward, and I'm going to stretch in our right viewport just so it's a little bit flatter and the points aren't all askew. And Shift F again, right mouse click, T to bring that down, H to stretch that, and we're going to bring it down all the way to the end. And we're just laying out the basic shape right now. We don't really need to worry about how exact it is, because we're going to be metaforming it in just a bit. And then we can go in and do our final editing so that it looks more accurate. You can see that that is actually going into our model now. So we can edit our first layer again. And some of the stuff's kind of hard to tell with our images, but once we get to actually working with it, we can just see that we need to tweak certain little bits, and you're never going to get it perfect on the first time, so you just gotta play around with it until you get it right. And then we can also drag this out, because it is a little bit fatter the wrong button there. And there we go. Kind of got that going. Bring those 2 points out and those up and see how it looks. I'm also going to hit Tab and metaform that so we can take a look at the metaformed object or the subdivided object. Because technically this is subdivisions since it's not the final geometry that's being added in here. And we can just use this to see exactly where we need certain things to go. Alright, so now we can grab our second polygon. And I'm going to keep this with our subdivisions on, just so we can really see the smoothing on everything. And hit Shift F, right mouse click, and start pulling out this second piece. And we just want to pull it halfway. And kind of stretch that just to fit it in. And then pull it out to the end. And we can use our perspective view too to kind of model this. And make sure we're using the drag tool with these polygons selected on the ends. So it's a lot easier to tell, so we don't have to accidentally hit and drag other points from the other parts of the object, because that's all we really want to edit. And we can pull that up a little and bring that down by putting these two viewports together. And we'll have a much better blend a little bit later once we metaform this. So it's pretty much the same principles throughout the whole model. You're just doing it to extrude different things. And once you get used to it, you can model anything, anything organic with these modeling methods, because these are the most basic tools you'll be using. And it's mostly about the tools. Smooth shift is definitely one of the best methods for extruding these polygons, for creating this kind of effect. And when you do the smooth shift and the right mouse click, and you manually bring that in, it makes it a lot easier. Because we haven't really showed you what happens with the smooth shift regularly, but I'll go ahead and do that right now. If we grab this polygon, hit Shift F, and don't right mouse click, but left mouse click, and pull it out, we can actually extrude that way. But you notice some sizing changes in that polygon as we bring it inward or outward, and we don't want that. At least, I mean, maybe you do want that if you're working on something, but the best way to really do it is just to right mouse click and then move it, and that way we have the same size polygon. It's much easier for working with certain extrusions. Deselect that, hold down Shift and click on both those layers so we can take a look back at that. And that's looking pretty good. We want to go in here and tweak this just a little. And those tubes that we're going to have are actually going to be coming out of some of the geometry we're going to be making once we metaform it. But we do want to get our basic object done here. And kind of pull that up and pull this down, because it just kind of drooped down in that fashion. And we'll just do it now before we have to edit a whole bunch of points. And then we also need to bring that up. And it's all pretty much about the tweaking of it. And we could even bring this tube down a little if we wanted. But even those don't really have to be entirely laying on top of each other. And it really depends on what you're using the model for. A lot of this stuff is just representation for medical models and things like that. And just demonstrating certain areas of the heart. But if you're using this for maybe film or something, or if you rip a heart out of a creature or a human or something, you might want it a little bit closer. We're just kind of lining that up. We can go in there and tweak that a little bit more later. But you pretty much get the idea of how that's made. So we're going to go ahead now and metaform this. So Shift D, metaform, and now you see we have a lot more geometry in here, and we can actually use these and polygons for creating these arteries that come out of the ends. One thing I do want to do really quick is Shift and colon and right mouse click, and that's just for the magnet tool, just to pull that out just a little so we're still matching up with our image, because we don't want to stray too far away from that image, because it is a very good representation of the model. And not to mention that these images are of an actual model, so they are entirely accurate, and you don't have to worry about drawing mistakes. So these are perfectly accurate when it comes to that. And we don't really need to worry about this section too much right now, because there is another piece that actually comes in through here, and then we're going to be editing that later once we get to that. But what we'll do now is actually use these polygons to create those tubes. So we want to move some of these polygons into place, just as we did with the other ones, because it's all the same model for the most part, just broken up differently. So we need to edit these extra polygons in here now. Just move those into position, and now we're going to start kind of extruding them. We're going to hide that second layer because we really don't, or the first layer, because we really don't need that in the view for this at all, because these won't be anywhere connected to that object on the first layer. Just move these just a little using Control T, which is the drag tool. And we're also going to use the two polygons on the end over here, but we'll edit those once we get these done. So these look like they're pretty much in the right spot. We can use Y and kind of rotate that a little bit inward, T, just to kind of move them into place. But we can do some more editing once we start pulling these out. So we'll grab that polygon, Shift F for smooth shift, right mouse click, T to move, and kind of move that outward. Y to rotate. And we want to bring it out not too far so that we have enough geometry in here to model this correctly. So we'll smooth shift it again and rotate it. And we also want to keep in mind our other view. And we'll bring it out to the end and pull that up. And also maybe do some edits with the drag tool. Because of course this tube should be a little bit thinner. But sometimes, like I said, it's just easier to edit that. Now, right now, as I'm rotating around, I'm actually holding on the Alt key and rotating. But my Alt key is programmed actually to a thumb button on my mouse, so it makes it a little bit easier. But if you notice, I'm trying to edit this area right here, but I want to rotate around it. But I'm rotating around this section right here. So actually the easiest thing to do is just grab some of these polygons from the section you want to work on, hit Shift A to center that in all viewports, and now as we rotate around, it's automatically going to rotate around just that section we're working on, those polygons that we had selected. So you want to make sure you're doing that if you're in here tweaking and trying to rotate around something and you don't want to have the views all messed up. Okay, so we'll grab that polygon now, smooth shift it, and move that in. Smooth shift it again and pull that in as well. And I'm going to hit 0 on the number pad to make that full view. We can zoom in a little and now edit this with just these temporary holes that we're doing for everything and the temporary hollowness. And we'll tweak that later and actually connect these tubes together through the whole object out to the other side in case you want to do fly-throughs or anything like that. Of course, we're not actually working on the inside of the heart, But if we were to fly through some of the arteries, at least we'd have something, or depending on the view you're at least that way it doesn't look like it's cut off, or that it's not hollow in the inside, because it really is. And we also need to actually pull down some of these other points in here. So I'll grab these, and I want to drag that down. So we do have a little bit of bend, and it bends out, and then the next one does as well, just underneath it. Okay, so now we can actually speed this up, since pretty much these two objects are exactly the same, this tube and the next one. There's no real sense in modeling an exact duplicate when we could just easily copy that and pretty much paste it down here. So we're going to do that right now just by going to polygon mode and selecting these polygons that we just made, making sure we have all of them just by running the mouse over it, holding down the middle mouse button or shift and the left mouse button just to make sure everything's selected. We're going to hit Control C. We're going to open up a new layer and paste that, and then show our object we're working on in the next layer. And we can actually, in this case, since it bends downward, I'm going to move this up a bit and hit Shift V, which is going to bring up our mirror tool, and we can mirror it down. And that way we're doing the exact opposite of what we had before. So I'm going to go in there and just delete those really quick. And we want to move this into position. And actually, since this one's a little bit smaller, we can just edit these points, pull them inward, and actually go and tweak that so that we don't end up with that weirdness. And we also want to line up kind of our points here where they're going to be connecting, because what we're going to be doing is merging these points, or welding them together. So I just want to move these kind of close to where they're going to be, just so we can get an idea of how that is going to look. And of course we'll be tweaking this once we get this done. Okay, so now what we can do is go back to our other layer and delete, just select that polygon and either hit K on the keyboard to kill it, or you can hit delete, because then so we leave those points behind. But since those points are still connected to other polygons, we don't really need to worry about using K to remove the polygons. But now I'm going to Control X to cut that, and Control V to paste it. And I'm going to select our points for welding. I'm going to hit 0 on the number pad while over that viewport to pull it up full view. And for welding, the second point you select, or the last point you select, is where that whole weld is going to show up, where the points are going to end up joining up in the end. So I'm going to go into point mode, and I'm going to select this point right here, and then this point over here, and hit Control W. And it's going to say 2 points welded. Click OK. And we're going to do the same thing over here. 2 points welded. Just making sure that we select the point on the main object second, in this case, or last, and then welding it. And now we're going to have to do a little bit of tweaking just because of the way that was positioned. And we do have a little bit of rotation in here because of that. But we can just go in and tweak that. And it does end up being a lot quicker than actually remaking that extra artery, or that second piece. Hit 0 back on the number pad. We'll take a look at that again. And we can see that we still need to bring it in a little bit more, and actually that'll give us a chance to actually twist it or rotate those polygons. So I'm going to grab those polygons in there. And actually we don't need these outer ones, or the inner ones. We can deselect those, that's not a problem. And then in our back view, Y to rotate, and we're going to rotate in the center of that. And then T, bring it up a little, and also move that inward and maybe rotate that down. And then, of course, since we have some weirdness in there, we can go ahead and just tweak that to make it look how it should. And pulling these points in towards the center too, so we get a nice blend between those. Or not so much towards the center, but towards the actual object itself. And just tweaking it, playing around with it. And like I said, you could do this for hours until you get it how you want it, but we're just going to leave it. I endlessly tweak, so I'll stop right now and we can move on with the rest of the tutorial. Otherwise, we'll have an extremely long tutorial of just tweaking, and then you won't learn anything. So we'll just move on here, and I'm going to hit A on the keyboard to center this on all views, and we can pretty much take these polygons we made right here and actually just do the same thing we did before and actually cut them, or copy them, not cut them, and paste them over here and weld those points together, and that way we don't have to remodel it, and it just speeds up the process. It does make it more symmetrical that way, and that might not be what we want because then it won't look entirely realistic, but we can just go in there and tweak our points a little to kind of clean that up. So we'll just go ahead and do that right now. But first we do want to position our polygons correctly, the ones where the ends are going to be. And actually it looks like they need to be over just a little bit more, so we won't use these ones. We'll use a different set of polygons so it lines up correctly. And maybe that's still even too far over, but that should be alright. We could even just kind of bend that in a little if we wanted. So if we grab these polygons right here, we could use the bend tool under modify, bend, and just kind of bend that. Whoops. And if you notice with the bend tool, we're actually going the wrong direction. It's bending this way instead of bending that part. So we can undo that, hit N on the keyboard to bring up numeric, and select this other little triangle there. And then we'll go on the right direction. And we're just bending that inward just a little. And now we can grab these two polygons, which are in the correct place, and we'll use these and just kind of drag these points out using Control T, the drag tool, just so we make them bigger so that when we're welding, it's much easier. And we'll, of course, edit these on the outside as well once we do that. Or maybe even just a little right now, just to pull that out and keep it nice and smooth so we don't have a large level of editing once we get to there. But we'll just go ahead now and delete these polygons, and we need to grab all of these. And actually one of the easiest ways is we're going to select this polygons in the center and then hold down Shift and the right bracket key, and what that's going to do is select the next loop of polygons, and we can just go down until we get all of them, and that sped it up a lot quicker. So Control C, and we want to Control V and do a new layer, and Shift V for a mirror, and delete that other set we have. T, we're just going to move it down. Y, we want to rotate it and kind of move it into position. And now I want to show it with our other object here, just so we can see if everything lines up or if we need to move it in a little bit more. And it looks like we might need to move it in just a little, maybe tilt it. Y, rotate it that direction, move it in just a little, and maybe move it up and in. Okay. And back just a little, and that should be good. So now we can Control X and Control V to cut and paste this onto our second layer, and now we're just going to go ahead and weld these points like we did with the other ones. So make sure we're in point mode, and we're going to select these points. And now if you notice too, I'm selecting a point, like let's say I select this one down here, it's actually selecting this one out here, outside on the cage, and that's because we have cages showing, and these are actually our original polygons. We can turn off cages in this viewport if we wanted to, and that will actually show the point selection down here. But I prefer actually seeing how our original polygons look as well, so that's a nice little helpful thing. So Control W to weld, making sure we select that the point on the main piece second or last, because if you're doing more than 2 points, then it's going to be the last one. But right now, since we're only doing 2, it's the second one. And now we have that all welded. And we'll take a look at it. And it's starting to look a little more like a heart. We'll of course need to edit a lot of this stuff in here, but I'm going to worry about a lot of that once we finish modeling our third piece, which is going to be this back section over here with our main arteries on the sides and going up and down. And that is going to be the next piece that we model. So make sure that you save it, and I have been saving, so just make sure you set up your object for saving. You can do an incremental save if you wanted to, which will set up by versions, and that way you can go back to a part of the model. Like if you mess something up, that way you don't have to redo the entire thing because you messed up one little thing.